Hello, been posting a recent series, Science of Ancient Symbols, and of the based between episodes 20 to 33, been talking about alchemy. And in this one, I'm not going to include that in this series, but it does tie into also to some recent posts in regards to ancient metallurgy, and for instance, what the actual copper was compared to pure copper, which is often referred to, or bronze versus arsenical bronze. But this will deal. So this is a famous painting of an alchemist slab, and using phosphorus, almost in the same way that luciferin can be used to illuminate. But also that it can be extracted from urine, which is one of the elements of the alchemist. There was even a special symbol for urine. You can also get sulfur from there, but for instance, in ancient Rome, they would put buckets out on the street and collect urine to use in tanning and even dye making. So this icky stuff was actually quite useful and valuable. But this, to have a look at phosphorus, and by that I'm going to bring up the famous iron pillar of Delhi, which is very famous for the fact that it doesn't rust. I was looking into a little bit, but I can't add too much. Basically, just be a bunch of links and a few other bits and pieces. Previously, I did a video on this because I got especially intrigued by this because of the use of measurements which would not be assumed to appear in there. So the pillar itself is partially buried. Now, it was relocated. It's roughly 1600 years old. Was relocated, and the buried portion now is a little bit less than what it was. There are some marks to show that it was where its previous location, it was buried a bit deeper, but still, it's not the height of the pillar, it's the entire height of the pillar that really counts. And again, this mysterious doesn't rust. However, we'll look some good stuff in regards to that. But so if you include the entire height of the pillar, including the below and above ground portion, it's 27.33 feet, which is just one of these reoccurring numbers just in not only sacred architecture of the ancient world, but an essential of sacred architecture, national capital, state capital buildings, major monuments, memorials. It's almost like it's easier to pick one which it's not there than it is to find one. It's just so it just seems to be always built into this, and so 27.3. I'll try to remember to put the link to the video because the numbers built into this. But you also have the capital here on top. So at the top of the pillar, it's 1 foot diameter, which the use of the so-called modern English foot, not only is it much older than what we think it is, we can see it in all sorts of ancient temples, Parthenon being the one I refer to most. We see evidence of it in the Salamis stone. Not only is the foot important, but it's how it unifies Doric and Ionic, as in the Doric and Ionic columns on mason boards. But these schools of architecture, again, U.S. Capitol building, White House, all across the world, really very, just to say, Masonic, which has connotations which, again, much different, I would say, to what is the standard fare. But anyway, the use of this ancient unit of measure as well appearing where it shouldn't, but the point of it is the iron pillar itself. Even the wiki article gives a few little nods to it. So recently, why does not rust? Well, it appears to be the use of phosphorus. Now, this will also connect to pre-Iron Age iron. If you follow my drift, I'll get to that in a moment. But so basically, there's a coating that formed around the iron pillar, and it protects it from rust. And so, but then the question will be: is it this alchemy or metallurgy in the pure sense? Was this created that way? In essence, was the phosphorus added, or is it also suggesting it's something else? So I'm going to put all these links here will be in the description as well, and it's worth looking at because the makeup of the iron pillar very closely relates to Bog Iron, which is not so well known source of iron before foundries and the Iron Age, typically because they would mine the ore and process it in a very similar way to basically the same way that we do now. And so Bog Iron, as the name implies, it's usually found in bogs, and you get it in large lumps as well. So there are certain places, boglands, where it appears more often. very valuable. People would go around basically with a stick poking through the mud of the bog and trying to find this hard uh, bog iron, which is uh, almost 50% iron usually, but also contains phosphorus in there. But it also can be extracted in smaller elements like spring water. Often will have at least very, not this large convenient lump, but it'll have smaller bits and pieces. Now, there's a channel, wonderful channel, Primitive Technology, and he's here in Australia, but he basically, in one of his videos, he grabs some mud from the spring, pops it in his furnace, and he gets these tiny little beads of iron from there. But that was just, sort of a random collect. But he shows the process that iron is actually a lot more present than what we don't just need the standard ore, and also have some very simple technology can be used to process this. Also put this link because especially in Northern Europe, so for instance Poland and Scandinavians, the Vikings essentially were using bog iron, and they saw, without the use of a mine and crushing the ore and processing it in that way. So it's like a sample of bog iron. I'll put some of these links as well, where where he found some bog iron pieces and then he's been processing it. So that's a processed bit of bog iron and cut it through. You can see the iron. So that's not a raw piece of bog iron, I'm pretty sure in that one. This is the link here. On the right we see the ore. So yeah, that's the ore, but that's where it's been smelted. And this has a lot to do. So we don't need to create molten iron to process it. For instance, the katana makers, they get actually low quality steel, and just by folding it, that they can get out the impurities, and they don't, they just heat it up to where it's malleable, not to where it's molten. So again, these primitive furnaces and can actually get iron to a point where it can be worked, and worked to a point that a master swords maker such as the katana makers can do their highly skilled art. So bog iron is rich in phosphorus, and this might also account why it doesn't rust in the bogs as well, not just for low oxygen, because there's quite a bit of oxygen actually in bog iron. So it's the phosphorus which is the important prevention from rusting, from oxidizing, and extracting phosphoric iron under laboratory conditions, smelting, bog iron ores, and just, replicating these primitive things. So bog iron was one source of iron. Now there's that Golden Compass movie, and where the Pianzabuel, the main armored bear, he prides himself on his sky iron. So it's not just like ore iron, we can also get bog iron, but also sky iron from the sky. So for instance, in Antarctica, they every summer they go out and just cruise around looking, because it's all white, the surface, they can find, well, the black lumps of meteorites stick out. And so but also that same thing happens in the deserts, where you have these, sort of flat, rather, and that sort of explains as well how the Egyptian, because they were using iron, not in large enough quantities, but they even had a special word for iron. It was like held sacred. The stone or the metal from heaven, bar and pet, and which was then differentiated in the later Iron Age but sky iron being very famous. There's even an old Buddha which was carved out of a meteorite as well. So this is an important source. And again, just a metal work in there. Again, just a reminder that the copper in Egypt contained natural arsenic, which made it particularly hard. But also the processing of gold and silver, and again, there's a tendency to oversimplify these things to fit certain narratives in regards to the ability to cut and work stone. And so yeah, iron. So basically, yeah, the iron pillar and alchemy. So these Indian, which were since the Indus times, they were very skilled at metallurgy and were engaged in trade. So 2,500 BC and probably earlier, but they were skilled metallurgists and they were engaged in trade. This iron pillar, mysterious, why does it not rust? Well, it's quite a bit now to show that it's phosphorus content, which would connect to alchemy. So whether it was or were they working with bog iron possibly? Because the signature of this bog iron and this ancient source of iron very closely matches that of the iron pillar. So that could be one explanation for the source of it, but also it could be that they were very, very sophisticated in their that they created that through adding it rather than just working the raw source of iron. So iron pillar, bog iron, phosphorus. So I'll post all these links in the description as well, except for and a few of these other primitive technology channel. Very, very, very interesting stuff as well. Okay, hope you enjoyed. Have a good one.